Good evening. Good evening and welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming. My name is Andres Martinez. I'm the editorial director of Future Tense. Future Tense, as you may know, is a collaboration between New America, Slate Magazine, and Arizona State University. We call ourselves a citizen's guide to the future. We like asking big, provocative questions about how emerging technologies are impacting the way we live. And we certainly don't pretend to have all the answers. We're all about asking the questions. We have content on Slate's website. We have Tori Bosch in the back of the room is our fantastic editor at Slate. And you can follow us at Future Tense now. Our events range broadly in terms of our subject matter. The last event we had in this room was on whether we posed a question of whether collaboration or competition was going to get us to Mars. And we have upcoming events on whether technology is changing language. We have another big event coming up on what algorithms want. So as you can see, we roam broadly asking questions about the impact of technology on society. It's particularly exciting tonight to be revisiting sports. One of my favorite Future Tense events of all time we did on the day the last World Cup opened, and we had soccer playing robots down from the University of Pennsylvania, and then we all watched the first game. So, and I have a very particular parochial interest in this subject because I still pretend that I can play soccer, and I played last night, and my knee is absolutely killing me. So, and I root for a professional soccer team that doesn't seem to be able to keep a majority of its players healthy at any one time. Nick Schmidl knows who they are. And also on a serious note, as a kid, I grew up rooting for the iconic Steelers of the 1970s. And of course I was way too young and not aware enough to realize the terrible toll that playing the sport at that time inflicted on some of the players that I idolized. And in retrospect, I often think about whether, the extent to which we are complicit as fans in sometimes romanticizing injuries as part of the game. And I think that's one of the interesting themes that hopefully will come to light tonight, in addition to looking at some of the really interesting technological efforts being made to make sports safer. So just on the housekeeping front, I'd like to remind everybody to turn off your phones, which I haven't done myself. And then also, when we have Q&As, please wait for a microphone and introduce yourself, because this is being live streamed. And we do appreciate questions in the form of questions with question marks at the end. And now I'd just like to hand off the baton we have two fantastic moderators for this evening. Nick Schmidl will go first. It's funny, Nick and I, coincidentally, with our boys, separate boys, we don't have boys together, but watched the Euro Cup final over the summer, and tragically Cristiano Ronaldo's team won. But I remember that night Chris said, we were talking about a longer running project that Nick was working on, and Nick said, I might have to write something on football too. And I said, football? Like this football? No, he said, the concussions, the whole debate. And I said, that sounds really interesting. But Nick said this in a way that I sometimes say I have to write an 800-word column. And it was like this offhanded, I have to do something on football. And, fast forward many months, and my New Yorker copy comes, and there's this fantastic, very long read piece on, Nick following this St. Thomas Aquinas high school program in Florida and giving all of this great background on the issues of injuries and technology, and just through the story of this one team, and it was just fabulous, so well known. But I was there when you first told me, I have to do something on football. So Nick is going to tell us a little bit about that story, which the headline of which, the title was, Can Technology Make Football Safer? And then he will moderate our first conversation and then hand off the baton to Josh Levine, who is he's an executive editor at Slate, our key partner in Future Tense, and also, as many of you may know, the host of the podcast, Hang Up and Listen. So, Nick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming out. I'll talk for just a few minutes about that story and how I was deemed somewhat appropriate to moderate this panel, even though I don't really know anything about technology, and my experience with football was short-lived as a sixth grader and then 4 months this summer and fall. But actually, so the story, at the magazine there was this conversation about sort of what I should do after having finished, I forget what piece I had finished in the spring, and the editor-in-chief of the New Yorker said, well, we should do a story about football. And I was like, all right, well, that's a good idea, boss. Like, are there any angles? Are there any ideas about how we should approach it? And it was just sort of, we should take stock of football in 2016, capturing all of its legal challenges, health concerns, excitement, sort of the whole shebang. So we settled on trying to figure out a way that if we could write a story about how football is being coached and parented differently now in light of the concussion crisis. And in doing that, I was very quickly turned on to Buddy Tevens here, sitting in the front row, who is the Dartmouth football coach. And Buddy has done a number of things that are quite revolutionary at the elite level. One of which is no longer tackling in practices, having banned tackling in 2011, right? And then a few years ago, introducing robots. They're mobile virtual players that are sort of 6 foot, 180-pound remote control tackling dummies. And so, as Buddy was explaining, and Coach's explanation was so articulate about concerns about, if we don't save the game, if we're not sort of thinking about coaching the game differently, there's not going to be a game left to coach. And I said, this is fascinating, but it's hard for me. Dartmouth, are there big schools that are sort of competitive at a national level, schools that are doing this, particularly maybe at the high school level? And Coach pointed me down to St. Thomas Aquinas, which at that point I had maybe heard the name once or twice. I proceeded to go down there. They opened their doors. They were very welcoming. In the preseason high school football rankings, they were the #1 team in the country. They were the only high school football team to be signed on to using these dummies. They did not tackle in practice. They seemed to be, in terms of conscientious, they seemed to be at that level the purveyors of sort of conscientious football. What made it more interesting is that half of the coaching staff had previously played, 3, 4, 5 members of the coaching staff had previously played in the NFL. Several of the players' fathers had played in the NFL. In fact, Cornelius Bennett, the Buffalo Bills linebacker, Hall of Fame nominee, his son was one of the defensive tackles. And for me, that actually, it was such a mix, because here you had all these players, people like Cornelius Bennett, whose peers were, suffering from early issues related to playing football. There were players suffering from either having suicidal thoughts, drooling their soup at age, mid-40s, and yet Cornelius Bennett sort of wanted nothing more than to see his son go and have the same illustrious career that he did. And so look, when I started the piece, I was talking to people. I talked to several people whose sort of politics and general worldview mirrored my own, and they said, when I started a story about football, or I started a film about football, I can't watch the sport after that. For me, it was sort of the opposite, because the more that I watched it, the more that I realized that I was sort of intoxicated, especially following this incredible high school football team around the country, intoxicated by the drama of it all. And it actually, it has brought a great deal into relief, has brought a great deal into focus in my own house, because now my son, who was at time last summer was 5 when we met Andres. We met them in Barcelona. We happened to both be in Barcelona to watch this Euro game, and I was like, okay, that's fine. My son's going to become a professional soccer player. This is going to be great. I start doing this high school football story, all about how the sport is potentially going to make you brain dead in some ways if you're not careful. And all my son wants to do now is play football. And so, in fact, yesterday or this morning, said, I'm not interested in playing soccer anymore. I just want to play football. And the kid is like really tall and skinny and all elbowy, and I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. But he has a really good arm. He's sort of, he's whatever sort of, his dad has been reporting on this high school football team, and so it's been an interesting sort of reacquaintance with the sport. I had played 1 year in 6th grade. I was the punter and the kicker and the right guard. I did 1 year, and I thought, all right, that's good enough for me. I'll go back to playing soccer. So, so all those issues are sort of what I tried to capture in the piece, and as a result of that, I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of these technological innovations. I'll sort of ask questions based on things that I saw with the team and how they had dealt with these robots, and then we'll open it up for everyone else. So why don't we bring everyone up now? Coach Stevens, how about first? Yeah, we can all just sit down, and then I can do a quick introduction, and we can then turn to, we have a video teed up, right? I think, am I told? Okay. Am I sitting, Andres, or standing? What's better? Sitting? Good. All right. Okay, so I'll do a quick introductions. Why don't we start at the end with Coach Stevens. So Coach Stevens, I mentioned, Dartmouth football coach since 2008, 7? 5? Okay. Had developed these mobile virtual players with the engineering, 5 students in the engineering program. I think we have a video that we can show so that everyone can kind of get a sense of what these look like. Can we play that?
The mobile virtual player, it's a tackling dummy that actually moves. It's a wide receiver, it's a running back, it's an offensive tackle, it's a defensive lineman. Having an opportunity to react, drop your pad level, deliver through, actually tackle something. And that's part of our practice protocol. Get guys out, do the things that you're going to do on game day, just don't get hurt.
Nice job, that's it.
We're teaching skill sets repeatedly. My guys practice it more. We hit more than anybody in the country.
That's it, huh? Good form, man, good form, that's it.
The applications we're quickly finding are really endless.
That's huge. It saves players. I mean, health, safety, freshen legs. I mean, it's big.
It never gets tired. All the position groups are getting an opportunity to use it. It runs at an appropriate football speed.
Cool. All right. Next, Roderick Moore, who is the Vice President of Catapult Sports and has developed a technology. Can you talk a little bit about sort of it's essentially mobile sensors, wearable sensors?
It's one wearable sensor that fits just below your T1. I have one actually here in my pocket, see if I can find it. But with it, it's a GPS tracking device. So with the device, sits below the T1, captures 1,000 metrics per second. So this can fit in your shoulder pads. If you're a basketball player, we have a garment where it fits on the athlete's body. So it's an indoor and outdoor capability. Obviously, indoor, you rely more on the micro movements, what we call the inertial movement analysis, whereas outdoor, you rely on the GPS. And technically, it's GNSS. Since it's Australian-based, we have access to the U.S. satellites as well as Russian satellites, so we have more coverage overall.
Can you talk about what's the genesis of this?
Genesis has started really out of the Australian Institute of Sport. There's Olympics where they didn't medal, and so as a result, they brought in a group of scientists, sports scientists, strength coaches, athletic trainers, sport coaches, and developed this group called the AIS, Australian Institute of Sport. From there, the 2 co-founders of Catapult, Igor Vandergreed and Sean Holthouse, asked the government if they could sell to elite sports. So one of the first sports was actually rowing. There's a device that fits on the boat as well as on the athletes that captures the movement of the boat as well as the athletes and their player load that they're encompassing during that movement or during that activity. And then from there, moved across the pond. So here in the U.S., I started with Catapult 3.5 years ago. It's been here in the U.S. about 5 years. So one of our first teams was Jacksonville Jaguars, Oregon State, Florida State, San Antonio Spurs, Houston Rockets, to name a few.
So in the football sense,
Michigan, yes, we just signed Michigan. Department-wide deals. Exciting. Dartmouth is.
what and so it's measured. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what is it exactly measuring?
It measures your speed, your distance, acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, collisions, impacts, tackles. It's validated for tackles for rugby, but now we have new metrics coming out that's specific to American football, as well as player load, which is an accumulation of work. So a lot of coaches will use the player load metric because it's consistent no matter if you're inside or outside. So they'll use the player load metric to periodize their activity, their practice, so that they know during team period I want my athletes to have a high player load. Whereas in another period where it's more teaching, less physical, then I want my player load to be higher. So it's another tool for the coaches.
And so in my reporting, I had and this I think had been reported even in 2009 in a Malcolm Gladwell piece for the magazine. There were some sensors. That is the University of North Carolina that's using the helmet sensors, or is it Duke that measures the impact?
I think
of,
Kevin Guskowitz.
Yeah, exactly.
Crew, yeah.
Is that are these sensors able to measure impact?
Not from a collision, from a head impact, concussive type impact, more from impact of an athlete hitting an athlete. So from a G-force standpoint.
Okay, cool. All right, Derek Belch, who is a former Stanford football player and is now assistant coach with the team?
Used to be.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is wild. I mean, so do we have a video as well for this that we can show real quick, and then we can talk about it, because maybe a little hard to.
DC1. For the 3 set. Red 80 hot. Hey, lefty.
It doesn't actually look that jump.
Red 80 hot.
All right, good fit.
Cool. So 360-degree virtual reality headset that the players can use, the quarterback can use, and anyone can use, yes? I mean, is it mostly quarterback focused at this point?
Mainly quarterbacks, but we can do pretty much any position on the field, depending on how forward-thinking the coaching staff is and wants to build that library out, which is difficult, but quarterback is the most high-impact position and the easiest one to do.
Can you talk a little about the genesis of this?
Yeah, so I was coaching at Stanford in 13 and 14. I actually played there from 03-07 for Coach Stevens, so it was a little weird to go back and sell our product to Dartmouth and call him Buddy and not Coach Stevens a couple years ago. But yeah, I was coaching there, and my master's thesis while I was coaching was to come up with a way to train football players using virtual reality. And my advisor is a guy named Jeremy Bailenson. Some of you that know VR may know that name. He's one of the godfathers of the VR space, not as far as building headsets, building cool gaming experiences, graphics, all that stuff, more about what is the effect of VR on your brain. So my research in his lab fed what we made for the football team academically. And in the back of my mind the whole time for 2 years, I thought this is something that could be a business, so pay attention. I had an MBA, so I was a little different than most football coaches, and because of that, David Shaw, the head coach, sat me down at the end of my 2 years and kicked me out of the office and said, go start a company, get out of here. So that was in January of 2015, and we hit the road about 6 weeks later to start selling basically nothing. And we got, when Buddy bought it, it was nothing, but it's a lot today. And we work with 6 teams in the NFL, 13 in college, 1 in high school, a couple NBA teams, a couple Major League Baseball teams, a couple NHL teams, using VR to train athletes. And we're also doing a lot of work just in the corporate world as well, using VR for general human performance training.
So. Wow, very cool. We'll talk a little bit about sort of plus and benefits of I mean, I guess the biggest thing is that in practice is where most injuries take place, right? So whether it's tackling with robots or whether it's taking snaps with the VR, I mean, you're avoiding the essentially Monday through Friday.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I don't walk into the room to meet with anybody and talk about injuries. It's probably the last thing that we talk about. We focus on in performance and human improvement, right? I only get the rep once on the field. I can get it 100 times if I want in VR. Yeah. Coach Stevens' quarterback from last year is a great example. His starting quarterback last year earned the starting job in his competition, and we were a result of one of the things that he did. And I think he watched like 1,200 plays in VR over the 2 weeks of that battle during training camp. Well, that's 1,200 more reps than he would have gotten otherwise from a mental standpoint. Now, they don't throw the ball. You know, it's all mental. They don't run around. So I never go in and talk about injuries. However, the result of what we do does have a very significant impact on keeping your body fresh. If I'm already injured and I shouldn't practice, but guys do it anyway to prepare for the game, can I get those virtual reps instead? Carson Palmer was in the media a lot a couple years ago using our product quite a bit, and he stops throwing in December because he knows that he's old and he shouldn't wear his arm out in practice every day. So he limits his team reps in December, and instead he went and got on our machine. So a lot of different use cases, a lot of different things where what we're doing could significantly impact health and safety in the game.
Wow, very cool, very cool, very cool. And finally, Ellen Aruda, who is a engineering professor at the University of Michigan, and is developing a polymer technology that could be fitted inside helmets. Am I close?
Yeah.
Okay. And essentially, this is the notion that we focus mostly on impact, but am I right to assume that or conclude that this is the brain slosh concern, right? Is that secondary?
So we tend to be concerned only with the force of an impact and not the energy.
Can you explain that for those non?
So there are two harmful effects of an impact. One is just the magnitude, the force. The other is the impulse, or sort of the fact that the person has momentum, and that momentum has to be conserved. So you can't swerve it around and send it in some different direction, which a lot of helmet manufacturers are trying to claim you can do. You have to take it out before it gets to the brain. So current helmets don't do a good job of dissipating that energy, taking it out. Your skull doesn't dissipate any energy, so then that leaves it up to the brain. And the brain does that by moving relative to the skull and by deforming, both of which are harmful.
Where are you in the development? I mean,
so we've been part of this Head Health Challenge that's funded by the NFL, Under Armour, GE, and NIST to develop materials for impact mitigation. And we're one of the finalists and the only university group in that. The others are startups. And we've been working on it for about a year. We've submitted our final report, and we're waiting to hear what the outcome will be. And we're working with material suppliers and helmet manufacturers to put these improved designs into their helmets.
and what is the I mean, I saw you have done work with DARPA. I mean, so how do you go from sort of DARPA, secret, spooky government stuff to helmets?
So the funding that initially led me down this pathway was from the Navy, and it was for lightweight body armor, lightweight, tough materials at high strain rates. And we started looking at the advanced combat helmet and the enhanced combat helmet. These are much more complicated than a sports helmet because they also have to survive a penetrating threat, right? So then we went to the sports helmet as a lower hanging fruit because you don't have to worry about a bullet piercing it. And so that's how we got onto sports helmets.
There's a video, I guess it's produced by the University of Michigan, that there's a point that you make in the video, which is that you wear a bicycle helmet, you fall once, the bicycle helmet is no longer good, you throw it away. And it just sort of, I mean, I don't know why that didn't quite occur to me, but it is crazy that you put on a football helmet and you expect that you're going to take thousands of contact points over the course of that, right? And so, like, how do you build a product that is not, like Rick Moranis in Spaceballs sort of large helmet with?
Well, I believe, the current football and hockey and similar helmets haven't been designed to protect the brain. They were designed to protect against skull fracture, which is a bad thing, and they do that well, right? And it's only recently that we've started to be concerned about brain injury and taking a look at these designs and trying to figure out how can we dissipate as much energy as possible over and over and over again. And in the case of the bike helmet, when you have a crash and your helmet's in pieces, it dissipated a lot of energy through fracture. And you pick it up and throw it away, right? That's not a practical solution in a football game, right? We all know that, or in a hockey game. And so you're left with other ways to dissipate energy that I feel haven't been fully explored yet in helmet designs, and that's what we're working on.
Are you all at Dartmouth? Are you all with this sort of with now where you are in the field, the sort of the vanguard with the MVPs and all that? Are you all also working on helmet technologies too? I mean, where do you?
They're certainly very aware of it because that will have an impact on injury as well. But we're trying to limit the contact in the game. The NFL has actually been a wonderful model. Their injuries in practice have tremendously reduced. The college game and Pop Warner and high school football, it's huge. And what I've opted to do is just we don't hit in practice. We hit other things, the mobile virtual player, bags and so forth. So we practice the skill set of tackling. And kind of the side benefit is we do it more often. I think we're more proficient with it. We're five missed tackles per game last year, which there's not many teams in the country that can say that. And it's I'm convinced we just do it a lot more. And it's kept us healthy. So in the MVP, it's another tool in the toolbox. And it's been pretty well received by people at this point.
Is there any concern on the health side of things that there's kind of a false sense of security that if you can build a better helmet, then it sort of lures young players into thinking that that they're more protected than they really are?
I think
not
there's
my
got to
area
be
of expertise. I couldn't
there's got to be a broad sense, and I'm of the conviction the coaching culture has got to address it.
Yeah.
And it's a better helmet is certainly going to help, but not using your head as frequently is going to help even more.
Yeah. With this team, I mean, it was interesting is that even as they sort of pride themselves on sort of being this sort of conscientious embodiment of the sort of new football, there are still coaches that admit. And this helps to kind of go back and keep going back to Florida the first 2 or 3 times. We don't tackle in practice, and then by the 3rd or 4th time, they say those MVPs are great, but they're hitting the guys in the shins, the hard plastic at the bottom, and then they said sometimes it really just feels good to sort of lay the wood on somebody as they're coming across the middle of the field, and it's like man, and that's what I wonder sort of how you're able to. Do you have to sort of nod almost, and they admit. These coaches admit that, I'm a dinosaur. Do you have to sort of nod to the dinosaurs in the sport while you're also trying to kind of revolutionize the game?
It's become easier because there's more awareness. But I had a linebacker who was an all-league kid and led the league in tackles. He said, Coach, I called BS in the living room. You're telling my mom and dad that you don't tackle at all. I said, yeah, Division I linebacker, and I'm not going to tackle. Right.
Yeah.
And then when he came in, the hardest people to change are the incoming freshmen, because the inculcation is hit, blow people up, excitement, and all that type of thing, and say, no, it's not what we do here. Yeah. And they get better at it over time. So our kids are pretty capable. And again, I mirror the NFL. I've been to a lot of camps over the course of time. You watch those guys, some of the world's best athletes, 100 miles an hour, and they don't hit anybody.
Yeah.
And it's you just avoid. My big push is, hey, protect ourselves. You quite often will see an offense and a defense pitted against each other, and it gets really nasty.
Yeah.
So look, they're our teammates. Somebody's going to win. We play our best versus our best, and they should win sometimes. They should win sometimes. Come away and appreciate good play. Just don't feel like you got to dominate the whole time.
Yeah. Do you with the virtual reality? Do you feel? I mean, are there only certain teams that are able to afford? I mean, how do you sort of prevent it from only going to the St. Thomas Aquinas sort of high schools and the elite high schools? I mean, how are you able to kind of almost democratize these expensive technologies?
Yeah, well, today we're not. Is the simple answer. I mean, I wish I could say we could. I'm in a unique spot because I coached, and now I'm running a company, and we look at our balance sheet and we look at our revenues and say, well, I'd love to give the thing away to make all players better, safety implications, et cetera, but it just doesn't make sense. So what we're doing right now is not cheap, and if we were to just give it away or drastically cut price in order to work with everybody, no different than what these guys go through probably as well, we'd be out of business in 9 months. So you have to maintain some sort of premium pricing strategy. Also, when teams do it right, there's a lot of value that's created. So it's not for everybody. It's for people that want to create that advantage because it's something that works. And unfortunately, that's how we have to treat it today. We're already looking at how can we build out a virtual a static virtual library that would apply to all high school kids. Would it necessarily replace practice? Probably not, but will it coach better than what the coaching that a lot of kids get from a decision-making standpoint? Absolutely, and will give them a chance to get more reps that they otherwise couldn't get in the real world.
Because essentially, if you're training for a team the following Sunday, you have to be able to sort of simulate all of the formations that they could be running against you on right after the previous Sunday's game to get right. I mean, you have to sort of put new inputs every week.
Right. Yeah. So football, this is why what we're doing works so well for American football. It's really not very good for soccer, basketball, hockey right now because there's just way too much movement. Those sports are way too fluid. And the game plans don't change that often in those sports. Basketball has a lot going on mentally. It also really comes down to who makes shots and who doesn't at the end of the day. With football, the game plan is changing literally every week. In the NFL, if you make it all the way, it's 21 different game plans over the course of the year. So what we do, allowing the players to get more reps in a finite amount of time, we'll hear from the NFL later and from Jeff, and when the teams are on the field, they're on the clock. And if they go 1 minute over, they get fined. So reps come at a premium in college and the NFL. And eventually we're going to see these rules go into high school as well too. So we think what we're doing has a lot of merit if it's really used the right way.
Do you see overlap between the programs, the schools and the programs that are investing in MVP and that are investing in virtual reality?
Yeah, I don't know how many of the schools we work with have, and vice versa, have each other's stuff, but the forward-thinking programs and organizations really stand out from the rest. As a matter of fact, we're in our third year now, going into our third sales cycle in the NFL. I wouldn't be shocked if we added a couple teams this year because we've already gotten the early adopters, 6, right? And now the other 25 are really hard to push over the hump because it's just not a sport that moves quickly. It's not a lot of people that question the validity of it. I don't want to change my practices. I don't want to change the routines of my players. So this is going to take time, but we'll get there. Very confident in that.
Speaking about sort of the NFL, the NFL investing in this, the development of this project, funding the development. One of the things that I was surprised when I started the story is that you hear that the NFL is sort of taking the lead, but I think everyone's probably assumption is that the NFL has sort of contributed to the problem by turning a blind eye for so long, until 3, 4, 5 years ago. I sort of wonder. Do you think that is it genuine that the NFL is? How do you sort of balance the excitement that the sport is producing with safety concerns? And do you feel like there is a tension there as someone who is or not even safety concerns or performance? Is the NFL truly sort of at the vanguard of trying to introduce some of these changes? Do you see their role as being a productive one? Did you see them?
I see them aggressively so. I think they get faulted often in looking at the coaching culture. You don't go to school to learn how to coach. You do what you were taught to do when you were a player, and nothing has changed. I say it publicly, if you're 25 years or older, you have no contextual draw for what's going on now, because it was toughness, bull in the ring, Oklahoma drill and all that type of thing, taking hits. And just the warrior mindset. And the science just wasn't there way back when. I don't think anyone was trying to hide it. Just nobody thought about it. You get dinged, okay, sit down, take a drink of water, come on back. Yeah. And now there's just so much, catapult and all these things that never existed way back when. Yeah. I tell coaches, it used to be you didn't drink water and you took salt tablets back in the day. Where did that get us? Yeah. And now I think the progression in the NFL, I think, is setting I use them, again, frequently because they don't hit during practice. Player rules precluded. Why can't we do that? Why can't that be done at a youth level or the high school level? And it's an old school mindset. Well, that's not football. People all the time, they ask me about toughness. You can't develop toughness. I think you can in other ways. If I go out in a schoolyard and I see guys running around, you pretty much identify a guy that he's inclined to, could be a football player, someone else really athletic and doesn't like contact, maybe a basketball player, soccer player. The kid screaming on the sideline is probably going to be a soccer player. That's kind of the mindset, and you can kind of self-selective. But I think the coaching culture has got to take hold of this and say it's a different era. We love the game. I'm a tremendous supporter of the game, but let's change the way we prepare for it. I know at the college and high school level, probably 80% of the injuries occur in practice.
Yeah.
So if you, with us, we 80% drop when we stop tackling.
Yeah.
Concussive head injury, I think we had 6 in 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think too, you know, I'd actually really like to hear your opinion on this, because these guys have been around for a handful of years in the United States, and they're doing really, really interesting things as it relates to player tracking, load, force, fatigue, all that stuff. But a lot of the teams don't really know what to do with the data yet.
Yeah.
Right? And so we are still, same with us, we collect a lot of data too. We don't even know what to do with it.
Yeah.
We think we know. So we are still, 3, 4, 5, 10 years away from the impact of new technology really coming to fruition. And give the NFL and college teams that are embracing things like this credit, because hey, we don't know what it means yet, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably go through this all the time when you talk to new clients. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
With that, we have, if you take, say, NFL in particular, we'll have close to 75% of the teams individually that will use Catapult as more performance tool, but then also as a tool for return to play. So if they have an athlete that's injured, they know exactly how to program that athlete back into playing form so that they don't incur an injury again. Because a lot of times you'll see athletes come back too early. We see that all the time. My background is in strength and conditioning. I was a strength coach for 15 years, so we would have a great relationship with athletic trainers, and from your coaching eye, you would see an athlete and say, hey, he's about 90%. But it was like 90% of what? So now you have that what? You have, is his symmetry the same when he moves to his right, to his left? Does he have the same max speed? If you look at the data, we try to keep it simple for all of our clients coming in. Everybody understands speed. Everybody understands distance. Load gets a little tricky trying to explain that, but you can look at speed as intensity and distance as your volume of work. So if you look at volume and intensity and you manipulate those, you can be very successful. So it's been, a tremendous journey, I think, overall. And like you said, in America, we're 10 years behind on what they're doing in Australia. Australia, they can use the data. They've tracked so much. They know every 3 minutes I need to sub this particular player because we know he'll give us his max effort, his or her max effort during this time period, and we know we need to rest him for 45 seconds after that. So they've really got it down to a science.
It's interesting because I was thinking that my first question was like, well, okay, someone pulls a hamstring. How do you tell when it's time to know when the hamstring is healed? But it's not necessarily when the hamstring is healed. It is when they're able to perform at their peak.
Right. A lot of times, even if you look at just speed, and you see an athlete, an athlete has a max speed, let's say, of 20 miles per hour. But over the past 2 weeks, he or she hasn't run more than 15 miles per hour. That sets off an alarm to say, hey, is there an injury? Is there something you're not telling us? Because a lot of times your tougher, quote unquote, tougher kids won't tell you they're injured. They'll just push through it. But it could be an injury. It could be girlfriend. It could be school, social, whatever. But then that gives you another avenue to speak to the athlete and say, hey, what's going on? Is there something we need to talk about? So not only from the biomechanical, the physiological nature, but also that social aspect to say, hey, is there something going on that we can prevent this fatigue? Is it regeneration? Is it hydration? Is it nutrition? So there's many factors that go into it.
Interesting. Are you sort of ingrained with the football team as well?
I was just going to say that, so at Michigan, I'm also co-director of the Exercise and Sports Sciences Initiative, and this is a partnership between athletics and the whole research arm of the university. And we have the Catapult system, at least the football team does. I think other teams do as well. And so you have the challenge of, well, coaches saying and trainers saying, well, we don't know what questions we should be asking. We don't know what data we should be collecting and what we should be pairing with what. And then we have other coaches who are saying, well, I want to know X, Y, and Z anyway. And so at Michigan, we've got the football coach has hired a data sciences expert, right? A PhD in data sciences. But the athletic trainer paired up with the student group of data scientists, and the students are crunching data for athletics right now. It's really fascinating. And so the coaches are coming in and saying, just go through all of these data and tell me this, this, and this, right? Everything's de-identified. I want to put that out there quickly and early and often. We take great pains to make sure only the coaches and the trainers can identify information back to a particular player, which is a huge deal on campus. But the students have access to the data. They're crunching numbers. They're experts in the faculty who are experts in data sciences are starting to look at these data and say, well, what's causality versus correlation? What really would result in an injury versus being something incidental? So it's starting to become a big effort, this whole sports analytics. Yeah.
I think it's really important to note that technology is really cool, but it also just doesn't just happen, right? So the second Catapult comes in the door, or Striver, or MVP, or anything, if you don't take the time and to actually use it and understand it, then what are you doing? Why spend the money? Why spend the time? It's completely pointless. And I mean, I've spoken a lot about what we've done over the last 2 years. I do things like this all the time, and my message is always the same. You're only going to get out what you put in, right? And I feel really bad for people like him, because he is hit up by people like us every day. Every day. I mean, there's 50 different things that come in the door, and how do you discern? How do you sift through, right? A lot of it's crappy, and then the cream rises to the top eventually. But if you don't actually take the time to think for 5 minutes about how you could use this, or hire somebody who can interpret data, then it's completely a waste. But if you do, then it can be really, really powerful.
I mean, it almost seems, as a business strategy, sort of akin to rehab after having surgery. If you don't have, if you have your knee operated on, but you're actually not sort of out there redeveloping the muscles, that surgery is not going to have done any good. And similarly with the VR or with the MVPs, if you don't have, I mean, what's the emphasis on having representatives of the company out with the teams that have bought on, as a kind of liaison?
So one thing that we have done, which directly impacted, as the founder of the company, the fact that I made $0 for 2 years. But one thing that we did, which I think was very smart in hindsight, was we actually put a Striver employee in the building with the NFL teams, the 6 that we've had now for 2 years. And they knew that whenever they wanted to use VR, they went to that person. So, when a quarterback who will be in the Hall of Fame one day that uses our stuff regularly wanted to use it at 6:30 in the morning every day, our guy was in there. I mean, you make sure nothing goes wrong. You make sure they're getting the most out of it. Trust me, if a player walks up and hits on and it doesn't work, it's dead to him forever, and he's never coming back. I mean, we've seen it. And Buddy's a customer of ours. He can tell you that when things don't work, it gets frustrating, even if it has nothing to do with us, and it's the computer manufacturer, right? So that's something that we did. We take a lot of pride in that, but that's not sustainable. We can't do that 32 times. We can't do that 150 times.
Right.
So you have to kind of get to the point where it is do it yourself, but you also don't want to remove the hand-holding too much, or you may not succeed.
Right, and the tech gets better. And it
more
becomes
reliable.
Other questions? We have a few minutes. Yeah, please, in the back.
Thanks. Is it Roderick, I think?
Yes, Roger.
Hi. I just want to ask you about the medical and legal ramifications of the Catapult stuff, and if your answer is, I'm not a doctor or lawyer, that's fine. I just wanted to know, hypothetically, if somebody like Hank Gathers or Reggie Lewis is wearing this back in the day, would it set off the alarm? I know it's different than an injury versus a life-threatening whatever, so that's the medical question. The legal question is, if somehow it's supposed to and it misses it, are you worried that the estate is going to bankrupt your company or something?
Well, to answer the first question, there was a school, ACC school. With our equipment, you can live track. So you can see an athlete as they run around on the field. You can see their speed, their distance, their player load, different metrics accumulate over time. So they were going through conditioning, and he saw an athlete, looked at his stats. It wasn't his normal stats. So he brought the athlete over, and the athlete had a glazed look on his face. And they were wearing heart rate monitors as well. So it captured the heart rate. And so he looked at the 2 data points, the physiological as well as the mechanical, and made a decision like, hey, we need to pull you out. They probably saved that kid from going to the hospital. So now, if you go to the flip side and say, if we miss something, with us, it's all mechanical data, not physiological. And really the physiological part is what you want to capture to determine, hey, to prevent an athlete from going to the hospital. So we don't capture the physiological. We capture that as an addendum from the heart rate straps that we'll use. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's how we capture that.
Hi, Rick Lane. Played football at Holy Cross and was part of the '87 team. We had a kid who took third in the Heisman, so some of the smaller schools can do well. Played Dartmouth a couple times.
Very good team.
But anyhow, question for the coach. You know, my son plays tackle football, travel lacrosse, and travel hockey. And we run into a lot of parents who, on the hockey team and lacrosse, say, I would never let my kid play football because of the injuries. Yet I see more kids getting hurt in hockey by far, especially head injuries and concussions, than I've ever seen on my son's football teams. Are you finding with the recruiting and the coaches, because Dartmouth has a great football program, hockey, and lacrosse, are you seeing a drop-off in all sports, or is it just happening with football because of the bad publicity?
Yeah, I'm not as plugged into the lacrosse or the hockey teams, but at our sport, talking to high school coaches, attrition is a concern. You know, touch football starting to come in. It's a skill set that the kids are learning. But everybody has a concern. I mean, there's not a weekday, a week that goes by that you're not reading something about concussive head injuries, CTE, dementia, and so forth. A couple of guys came out today, and it's how do you control that? It's concerning, and certainly it's been helpful from a recruiting standpoint with us. We say, hey, your son will never tackle another Dartmouth football player during his 4 years with us. So hopefully more people will follow.
Mike Raleigh, I work here. I was a swimmer. I wouldn't know what to do with football. But I'm just curious, the MVP, the digital, does it tell you how hard it was hit? And do you care? I mean, does it have a catapult?
We haven't put accelerometers on it yet. We're considering doing that, but it's we have helmet sensors, so my concern is what it's doing to the guy that's hitting it, not how hard he's hitting it, and it's not registering the way it would if he had a collision with another human.
I mean, a couple of quick observations about participation. I mean, at St. Thomas Aquinas, my sense is that even at programs that are less developed, that participation numbers are going down. But the number of kids that are lined up to go to schools that are sort of big feeder schools for big programs, I mean, it's there's no shortage. I mean, they suit up 100 kids every day at practice, not just for varsity. The other aspect of the impact in the helmets, and I wonder whether there was a coach who made a comment to me that they had not suffered any concussions this year. They used the SpeedFlex. Is that SpeedFlex helmets, the ones that have the kind of flap in the front, right? And he was boasting that it was right after they'd had their first concussion. He said, we haven't had any concussions yet this year, but we've given plenty. And I thought, oh, he just doesn't know how bad that's going to look in print, But like it, I mean, I guess it doesn't seem to be limiting the aggression of the game. And I don't use aggression in a sort of tabooed negative way, but it doesn't. I mean, do you see a less aggressive sport being played?
With my guys, I thought they were more aggressive on Saturday because they didn't hit all week long. It's kind of like the racehorse mentality. You cut the reins at the end, they're flying. Yeah. And they took a lot of pride in being an extremely physical team, and they actually felt better doing it because they just didn't beat up. The peripherals, shoulders, backs, arms, necks, and so forth, didn't get worn down. You hit a bunch, you're going to get hurt. It's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Matt Davis. I'm a fellow here at New America. I was wondering about football without helmets. I know that's something you mentioned. Australia, rugby is a very violent sport. They don't use any helmets, and I don't know what the rate of concussions are in rugby, but I follow a football team here in DC, and one of the coaches said that if you don't use helmets, you might be more safer in terms of tackling, in terms of contact. That's a very non-technological answer to this, but I'm curious about your all thoughts on that.
Rugby actually has a higher incidence of concussions than football. Just the volume is great. There's not as many players. So I don't think that would be the answer.
Yeah, I'm certainly the least qualified person up here about these things, but I think a lot of research shows that it's not the bone-crunching hit over the middle that leads to the concussion. It's the repeated head injuries or impact, offensive and defensive linemen, the little hits, hitting each other in practice, et cetera. So in that sense, these other sports are identical. In a scrum, you're banging your head all the time. So I don't really see what that would solve necessarily.
I think it's a crazy idea. And I wouldn't want to be the one to tell a bunch of moms of little kids that this year junior's going to play football and they're not going to wear the helmets. I mean, it's a game of very high velocities, very high relative velocities. That's the nature of the game. Two people coming at each other from opposite directions and making quick cuts. And, you know, I think that those hits that eventually are the most harmful are not the intent. It's not usually the result of the intention. You know, I mean, obviously they're hitting hard. Yes, that's part of the game. But those hits you see that really send somebody flying in a really ridiculous direction are rare and unintentional in that way. I'd also like to say quickly back to hockey and lacrosse. I don't know how easy it is to access this information outside of the university setting, but these helmets are certified by a group, and the recent certifications of lacrosse helmets showed that one of the leaders offered basically zero protection. I would rather have a football helmet on than a hockey helmet or a lacrosse helmet.
All right. I'm sorry, can we maybe, if you can hold your question maybe to the end of the next one, and if it doesn't get answered, we can boomerang it back to the people who are sitting in the front row. All right, well, thank you all so much.
I'm going to moderate the second conversation. I'm only up here because I was remiss in my opening remarks. I was so excited to get to Nick into the first conversation. I should have mentioned that Derek was kind enough to bring one of the virtual reality sets, correct? And I want to encourage everybody to stick around when we're done and have a refreshment, and maybe Derek can help us work through some reps, you know, while you have a refreshment. So, Josh?
Yeah, panelists for panel number 2, please come up. And thank you guys from panel number 1. That was great. I have to tell Coach Stevens that I grew up in New Orleans in the 80s and 90s, and I still have the buddy system jingle from Tulane stuck in my head, so thank you for that. To my left, I have George Atala, who's the Assistant Executive Director for External Affairs at the NFL Players Association, spokesman for the players. You might know him from such websites as twitter.com. George.
Happy to be here, everybody.
Thanks for being here. Victoria Jackson is a sports historian at Arizona State University, also a star college athlete, I would say. You went to UNC and Arizona State, and did cross country and track and field. And you specialize in college sports and women. Current book project is Social Justice and Injustice in American Intercollegiate Athletics, connecting the effort to expand opportunity for college women in sport and the problems of big-time college sports, which disproportionately affect young black men. To her left is Jeff Miller, Executive Vice President of Player Health and Safety with the NFL, oversees the NFL's player health and safety programs, scientific research, and youth football programs, and oversees the partnership with GE, which was mentioned in the first panel. And on his left, Ken Shropshire, Director of the Wharton Sports Business Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania, and was the chairman of the school's Legal Studies and Business Ethics Department from 2000 to 2005. Thanks to all of you for being here. Jeff, I want to start with you. Folks were talking in the first panel about what the NFL is or isn't doing. So just from your perspective, what is the NFL doing now with regards to technology and making the sport safer?
You want the whole portfolio?
Maybe start by talking about the GE initiative.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about the large-scale partnerships that we have and significant investments. I think you heard from the first panel that I think we have a relationship with each and every one of the people who were represented there, either through the league or through the clubs, through scientific research investments or as consumers, which I think is a good representation of the mindset that the league takes towards innovation and advancement and investing in hopefully the right or interesting technologies to make these improvements that affect the health and safety of our athletes at the end of the day. Specifically to the GE partnership. We formed a partnership called the Head Health Initiative with GE 4 years ago. Later, Under Armour and then the federal government joined us. And what we did was develop with them significant diagnostic tools. Of course, if you're going to improve diagnostics, you would work with GE. And there'll be new scanners and such that will come from that. But we also ran, which I think is the more public-facing aspect of this, 3 innovation challenges, crowdsourcing initiatives against diagnostics, against prevention, and against material science. The third one, which is the one where University of Michigan is the finalist, and I think just in a few short weeks we'll know who the winner is. And from that, too, came a new helmet company out of Seattle, a new company that was in the automobile industry that produces a turf underlayer, which will cushion the blows when players fall. In our game, if we're talking about concussion, just as an example as to why that's important, in the last few years, somewhere between 15 and 20% of concussions at the NFL level annually come from heads hitting turf. And so a surface that absorbs some of that force would be a positive. And we work with the Army Research Lab, which was another winner there around some rate-dependent tethers. In addition, we announced a $100 million investment this past fall called the Play Smart, Play Safe initiative, and a significant aspect of that is what we call our engineering roadmap, which is working with biomechanists around the country, material scientists and others, to create an environment where better protective equipment will be created. That's, again, challenges crowdsourcing, but it's also measuring the on-field environment that happens in the league, video reconstructions of hits that cause concussion, finite element modeling of helmets, which doesn't currently exist, working with the helmet manufacturers, disrupting the helmet industry, all sorts of things that companies in the technology spaces often do. And it's a little early to see the fruit of our labors on that, but over the next 3 to 5 years we will.
And George, what would you say is the current thinking of the Players Association, of the players, about these initiatives that Jeff just described?
I think we have a slightly different philosophical approach to some of the things that Jeff has mentioned. And you know, we've been, to those of us who have followed the industry, you know, we've been locked in this sort of existential health and safety battle, at least since I've been at the Players Association since 2009. And our essential philosophy is own the health and safety problems that exist in the game before we start coming up with new technology or before we start reaching out to other partners. I mean, we have a plan in our union to look at things from a very basic workplace safety level. So you mentioned the turf initiative. Our joint quintile data now shows that there's a statistically significant difference in the incidence of injuries that take place on grass versus on turf. So how are we going to approach that problem? Concussions tend to get most of the headlines, but our job as a union is to approach things from a workplace safety issue, to look at health and safety holistically, everything from what the helmets are made from, how we're innovating on the data elements of it, the turf studies, our drug policies, and everything in between. So I think as advocates on behalf of the players, we don't believe it's our positioning to rest at any point to say, okay, great, this one initiative or these great initiatives. Not that they're not great, they are. And we're happy that the league has come around to taking a proactive approach on a lot of these things. But our position is to advocate on behalf of the players, and when we see things like the turf versus grass, for example, Jeff, not to tip you guys off, but we'll be coming full force once we have some more information about how to better advocate for those types of improvements.
Well, Victoria will be between you guys, so it'll all be.
Is that why you guys sat us this way?
It wasn't my seating chart. Ken, when you hear that conversation, you're a business ethics and legal guy. What do you think? What about the balance here between workplace safety issues and developing new technologies?
Yeah, on this one, I can really be pretty neutral and watch both sides doing what they're supposed to do. And certainly both sides in quiet moments could say we could do even more. It's the challenge for the union is to really get inside the players' heads and really get them to understand the kinds of things
they may need to do to make the game better. It's litigation that's just kind of come to a head in some ways. Always hovers over a business when they try to make change and do some things that are right. I mean, in some ways, when you make change, it's an admission that something was wrong. So it's not surprising that we have this conversation. This is progress happens over time. There'll be a collective bargaining moment. There'll be a great moment of progress because there'll be formal agreement, and then the engagement will happen again. But this is what both of these men are charged to do from their organizations.
Yeah. Victoria, where do you come down?
Well, I work in the collegiate space. I teach at Arizona State. I work with a lot of student athletes. And so, right, it's all predicated on sport as educational. So my place is falling more in line with George's place. Right, these aren't employees, as we're told a lot. This isn't a workplace. They're student athletes. And so for me, I take the educational value of college sport very seriously. And so what does that mean as far as well-being of students? They can't learn if they're concussed. They might not be experiencing the same student life or learning experience as the regular student body because of the structures of big-time intercollegiate athletics as far as travel and those sorts of things. And so, you know, if this is all structured, that college sports are educational, we need to be acting in ways that prioritize athlete well-being when it comes to that education and also their well-being and safety.
I'd be interested, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to dovetail off of that actually. So the active NFL players have a union and resources to bargain and advocate and pay my salary and pay our benefits and have a marketing and licensing arm to push against the business interests of the league at times. The collegiate athletes have none of that. And I think you sort of see my blood boiling having this discussion because especially for college football players who are not subjected to the innovations that you are doing at Dartmouth, Coach, they are actually in the other direction. A lot of colleges still have two-a-days, which we can, to your point, eliminated in our collective bargaining agreement in conjunction with the league. We're proud of the advancements that we've made jointly with the league in 2011 on those issues. The fact that college athletes don't even have a seat at the table, a formal seat at the table, I think is the biggest tragedy in this whole thing. It's not a question of whether or not they should get paid, right? The money issue is secondary. It's how do we best advocate to have a positive student life? And I think that's the one thing that I took away from your opening remarks that really sort of struck a nerve. It's like, we're not talking about should they get a salary or not. It's do they deserve a formal seat at the table to advocate for the things that will improve their life?
I think we can stipulate, or I hope we can stipulate, that football is dangerous no matter what technology we have, no matter whether you're tackling in practice or not. And I'd love to hear from all of you guys what you feel like is an acceptable level of danger, and maybe it might be different for the NFL, for college, for high school, or for Pop Warner. Whoever wants to jump on that. Ken, do you have a thought?
Acceptable level of danger. When you ask the question, so long time ago I played college football, played at Stanford, got paid scholarship for playing for 4 years. I am often asked, would I let my kid play? I mean, that's kind of the common question. That's kind of the way to be responsive to your question. Fortunately, my kid essentially at some point didn't want to play, so I didn't really have to engage in that. I think it is challenging to play a number of sports that were mentioned, and I think it is something that families need to make an evaluation of. It's like these guys, I talk to a lot of guys that have benefited greatly from the game, that have to make that decision with their kids or work with their kids in making that decision. So it's not, there are a lot of things that are potentially dangerous in life, and I think the goal of everybody that loves the game is to make it as safe as safe as possible. So it's a journey. I mean, if the game was the same as it was in the 70s when I played, definitely not. Lot of movement forward, a lot of efforts. I mean, I would love to practice the way Buddy talks about now, as opposed to the things that I had to do back in the 70s.
Yeah. Maybe to restate a little bit, I think I would argue that it's reasonable to expect that NFL players who are getting paid to play this game, and I think there is more knowledge and awareness now of the risks than there was before, that to ask as fans or as coaches or owners to have them kind of accept more of a risk of playing this game than, for example, a college athlete, where we think there's an educational benefit to be had from this game. It's always struck me as a little bit odd that as a college activity, this is one where there's a very high rate of injury, which is not something that is like a college student going on campus. I was expecting to go to school and like get hurt. So I was just wondering
Not for sports reasons.
Not for sports reasons. No, I was just wondering if you guys had thoughts on whether that's reasonable to think about different levels of risk for different levels of the game.
To jump in and be the woman who talks about manliness, yeah, I mean, the sport develops at a specific, and as a historian, so to be obnoxious in that way too, but the sport develops at a moment in which there are like fears of the emasculinization of American men, because now we're imperialist to the point of being a continental nation, and well, we're going to have to be imperialist beyond that space. But you know, concerns about sedentary work are part of what inspires something to help young men develop their manliness in the context of the South, with you know, the abolition of slavery and the lost cause. You know, we've been emasculated. We, as in I'm a white male speaking right now, we've been emasculated through the loss of this war, and what better way to demonstrate our manhood than to play football? And oh, we happen to have segregated schools, so we're only playing against other white men, and our physical prowess is equated with our intellectual prowess. And the people who don't play, who go to you know, these premier all-white institutions, can watch and learn from manliness on the field and this prowess, and they can be the state's next political and business leaders. So there's educational value in the violence, I would say, historically, and although we might not speak about it in this way now, that kind of has tentacles into the present. And certainly, I mean, you read about sons and fathers watching football together and the lessons they learn that are passed down generationally. And ooh, even better, if I play to impress my dad, now I'm one of those manly men too. So I think there's a lot more culturally going on here, and kind of assumptions that are now being questioned about the value of participation in the sport, particularly when it comes to brain concerns. But isn't that just part of the sacrifice? Because now I can be exceptional in this place too, and learn from that experience of pushing myself and taking a lot of pain and putting it away somewhere. Sorry to throw all that out there.
I'm gonna, if it's okay, I'm gonna go a different direction. No
thoughts on the lost cause.
I have a lot of. I think that's fascinating, but I don't know enough to react to it, so I'll stick to what I know in this case. I was at an event with the NCAA relatively recently, and to put it in the context, to go back to the question you asked about relative risk, men's football was ranked 5th in concussion among collegiate sports. 5th. Now, that's not a stat that often comes out. That's not a stat that fits with the public narrative. That's not a stat that people really know what to do with. It's the most because there's the most programs, the most kids playing, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of proportion of concussion suffered by those kids who are playing those sports, it ranks 5th. And as I understand it, it's not my stats, that's relatively consistent. So the reason I raise that is not because football is safe or not safe. I raise it because this is a broader conversation than that. The point of the matter is, if you want to put football into that context, let's put other sports into that context too. Now, that doesn't alleviate anybody's concern, including ours, around ways to make the game safer. I mentioned all of the investments the league is making, the partners that we've joined with, the engagement with the government, all of the fabulous experts that we've had the benefit of surrounding ourselves with, and with the Players Association, because George and I could probably fight endlessly about this. But it's also true that a lot of these initiatives, we partner. We do. Their biomechanical engineering consultants are working to develop a better sensor with ours hand in glove, and we will meet next week at the league office with those people endlessly to talk about things that I don't understand, but that are going to advance the safety of our sport over time. And so whether it's the head or whether it's advances we've seen in cleat and shoe technology to prevent turf toes and high ankle sprains and all those things, the game is getting safer because technology is allowing it to become safer, and wise investments and good partnerships can permit those things to happen. But if we're going to talk about sports, let's, that relative risk issue is a broad issue.
So, I was going to say, the thing about football, I mean, historically is the regulation of football in college began because people were getting killed in the early 1900s playing the game. So it's not a mystery that there needs to be focus on the health and safety of the players in the game. So there's something about the choice to be involved in the game that's not, you didn't know what you're getting into. I mean, there's certainly some degree of that, but the idea that there's the big issue, that part's not a mystery. Specifics are.
What you're describing is incredibly important, though, and it's sort of this medical and ethical concept of informed consent, right? So I think part of the historical trajectory of why football has this consciousness as the most dangerous sport is, frankly, we can't ignore it. For years and years and years, there was not informed consent. There was quite the opposite. There was a destruction of health and safety information that could have benefited players. And when all of that came out, the union and the league worked together to try to spring forward, right? But the consciousness of football as a dangerous sport didn't just start in 2008, 2009, 2010, yesterday. It started as a result of a long and unfortunate history where we had to see former professional athletes struggle post-career to get to this point now where we are finally working on, I don't like to use the word making amends, but working on treating our professional athletes much better today. And I'm hoping that the way that we are now conducting business on the professional level will eventually trickle down to other sports. And not just youth football. I have 3 daughters, they're going to play soccer. I'm well aware of the concussion risks that Samia is going to have when she starts playing soccer, or the ACL injuries that she might have if she decides to go play basketball. So that informed consent, I think, is crucial. There's got to be a transparency of information.
So Coach Stevens in the first panel mentioned sort of near the end that one thing they've seen with the MVP is fewer injuries for limbs, right, extremities. And I think we often focus on head injuries for important reasons, but I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about chronic pain, without talking about painkillers. There's news just out about potential litigation there. George, is there anything that you can say about chronic pain and about painkiller usage in NFL locker rooms?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the lawsuit's the lawsuit, right? And the NFLPA, the union, is not a party to the case. It's a group of former players, so my comments are not tied to the litigation. My comments are more towards the overall philosophy for how professional athletes are treated in general. Let's go back to the very first principle of the labor management paradigm. Our union advocates to ensure that the athletes are treated as people first and as patients if they need to be treated as patients. And that means everything that comes with it: Hippocratic oath, confidentiality, informed consent. When anybody in this room goes to the doctor for the flu and you're given Tamiflu, that doctor is going to go over whatever side effects of that pill that he's going to give you, right? That needs to happen in the locker rooms, no matter what sport we're talking about. And when it doesn't, it creates a very dangerous situation for the athlete as a human being, right? And the trick is not to find, you know, as some Harvard researcher wrote a thesis a couple of months ago, is not to have independent people for everything. It's no, do your job. You're a medical doctor, do your job as a doctor. You're a trainer, do your job as a trainer. It doesn't matter who employs you. You have a fundamental duty to treat that person, whether you're giving them a shot or a pill or surgery or a second opinion or anything in between. And I think, you know, the technology and springing forward and the investments and all that stuff is fantastic. It all has to be fundamentally grounded in this sort of elementary principle that we all adhere to as a medical community, ethical community, business community.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. I don't think this was the intention, but if there's an implication that the NFL physicians, the medical staffs, the training staffs are anything less than professional, with great frequency, the best people in their community in the sports medicine spaces, nationally known experts, people who publish, people who teach, people who are the leaders in their field, then if there was implication they aren't that, then that would not be true, simply put. Our medical staffs put their players first. They treat them respectfully. They treat them well. They care for those athletes. To know these people and to know their standing in their communities is to respect them. And I think that the players' actions towards those medical staffs and the trust that they put in them is valued and on a regular basis supported. And it's something that's of great essence and importance to the league, as it should be, to the Players Association as well. It is a very impressive group of people who work very hard on issues of treating the players and keeping them safe.
Victoria, so in a hypothetical where football was made perfectly safe, do you think we would like watching it as much?
That's for the philosophers, I think. I don't know.
You're a deep thinker. I could tell from your last answer. Or just another way to think about it is how much of why we enjoy football is because of the feeling that somebody could get hurt.
Mm-hmm. The person I think who writes very well about this is a former pro football player, actually, Michael Oriard, who played at Notre Dame and played in the league for a long time, and he writes beautifully. I highly recommend his book, Reading Football. But he has this passage to open the book where he describes football as contact ballet. And he describes this moment in which the receiver is going up to make a catch, and you see the defensive player coming to hit him, and he sets it up beautifully, which is beautiful to read, but he says, as the person watching this, we want him to catch the ball. And he might get hit in the process, and he might just hold on, regardless of the power of the impact. We want the impact, though. That's what we want, too. We don't just want him to catch the ball. We want there to be the challenge and the risk and the threat and the danger. And that's what makes it beautiful. And so, yeah, I mean, it ends up being a completely different sport. And something I grapple with a lot is the difference between viewing something from the perspective of the participant versus viewing something from the participant of the spectator. And you see the kind of drooling for violence from spectators much more, right? I mean, we see it every time we put on a football game and see folks in the stands going crazy. And it's different from the perspective of the participant. So to a certain degree, I mean, describing the desire to hit someone really hard, I think during the conversation in the first panel, that's absolutely like rhetoric you hear in practices, trying to take someone out and that sort of thing. But yeah, the contact ballet idea is, I think, what is so compelling about this sport.
What about you, Ken? When you played, how important was the contact to
We
you?
didn't know what we were doing. That's a whole different day. I think today, I think some of the best football I've seen, so this is more personal than anything else, is Boise State, their heyday, trick plays, that sort of stuff. It is entertaining. I mean, there's certainly people that always want to see the crash, people that want to see the accident. I mean, if it became somebody waved a magic wand and said, let's make this a different game, and this is the way, and you touch somebody that's a penalty, it would be a different game, but there's a lot to the sport that is, by itself, can be just fascinating to watch. And you think of some of the best plays you've seen is when he wasn't touched. I mean, that sort of play, or the pass that goes over everybody. So it's my philosopher moment. So it's possible. I mean, not probable at all. I mean, part of what we're talking about is the reality of a $13 billion a year business is going to be here, and how can we make it as good as it can be, and the idea, with all these changes, these guys know. I mean, a lot of what you hear from the fans and otherwise is you're making the game weak, you're wussifying the game, and all that sort of stuff is what comes into play if you do try to get to the injury-free game.
My kind of philosopher moment here is
I knew this is what you really wanted to do.
That helmets are the things that keep players safe, but they also obscure their faces and allow us to dehumanize them. And I was thinking to talk about the bike helmet that breaks apart. The good thing about that is that you know that there was a crash, that you can actually see that something really dangerous happened. So I was like, maybe it would be cool if there was a football helmet that broke apart when there was a big impact. So as fans, we couldn't hide from what had actually happened.
That would drive our guys crazy.
You would sell so many more. You would sell so many more helmets.
From those challenges that I mentioned to you, the one that Michigan is participating in, and the others, we've seen some very unusual ideas. That would be among them.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. I think we can take some questions now. So in the back there, if you wait for the microphone.
Sure. I would like to thank you for putting together the panel, and it's a great conversation. I would say, though, that the football that we see now, for the most part, is not as exciting as it used to be for the reasons that you mentioned. I'd like to ask you the helmet design that seems to be more, I think, spread across the entire NFL. At first, you notice certain teams were wearing this sort of new design notched helmet. What's the difference between that and the 20-year-ago helmet that you typically, what's the difference in the protection level? And then also the spinal, is there been a difference in the spinal occurrence of fractures and spinal crushes and so on for head-on accidents? Do you know anything about that, statistics in the last 20 years on that?
Sure. As was mentioned, I think, on the last panel, that helmets are designed against skull fracture and have been. And since the certifying body came out in the early 70s, there's been a terrific improvement in limiting those sorts of catastrophic injuries. And the helmets today also reflect that as well. Those companies are trying to improve. They're spending resources against new engineering design. Somebody mentioned the cantilevered helmet in the front. What we do to measure it, candidly, we do this, again, jointly. This is off George's thesis, but we work, I'm going to keep saying we work together. We in the Players Association evaluate helmets every year.
We do.
We do. And we share those with the players so they can make informed decisions about helmets. And we will do that again in the next couple of weeks as we produce the next version of the helmet poster. And part of doing that is hopefully to encourage more innovation by those companies or new companies into those spaces. And I think it's fair to say we're beginning to see a fair amount of that. I think helmets are going to change. I think they're going to look different. I think someday we're going to be talking about position-specific helmets once we understand the different impacts that affect different players. For the life of me, or this is based on information from some of the biomechanical engineers we work with, a wide receiver sees the world very differently from an offensive lineman, yet they wear the same equipment. It just doesn't make sense. given what we know now about material science, what we do to measure the impacts, to understand the parameters of what's going on the field. And I think the infusion of that data over a period of time is going to change the technology, and that's the sort of project we're working on now. So I think where we are today is okay, and the helmets do a good job of what they say they're going to do. But where we're going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now and after that is going to be significantly different.
Can I just make Jeff happy? I agree.
Thank you. About time. I keep telling everybody I like George.
Could I jump in? Actually,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about data and science and technology, and challenge us to think a little bit of the implications of that for student athletes. So it's really good to have all this information. It's really good to get more reps. But if we're trained to want to win, and we're reporting to a coach who needs to win to stay employed, and we're brought up in a society and culture which places right value on winning, and we want to be the best at what we do, right? That's part of this. We're going to take, what was it, 1,200 reps with VR technology, and that might displace studying for XYZ exams. And we need to think about putting structures in place, at least within the K through 12 and collegiate space, to make sure our student athletes are still students. And it's great to have all this technology, particularly when it comes to performance and safety, but we need to have that at the back of our heads kind of all the time, especially for people who are educators. Coaches are educators, right? Developing well-rounded people, right? Because this is all educational. The data scientists at Michigan, the students, they're probably getting paid. Possibly with athletics money. They're not getting paid. Are they getting course credit?
This is a club.
It's a club. Okay. That's
Wow.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, killed my point. So that's fantastic. But I imagine in other places there are students who are employed by athletics to develop sort of scientific studies, or they're working in some other way to support the athletics enterprise. And isn't that interesting that they have work study when others don't, or could get course credit for what they're doing in this athletic space? So another thing to keep in mind.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me co-opt that question.
Hi, yeah, I guess this is more for you, Jeff, but it goes back to that bigger point about acceptable levels of risk at different ages. And I guess I'm wondering, what could the league be doing in terms of paying back to the community in terms of youth development? Like already we're thinking of, like in the college situation, there's much less protection for the players. Great what they're doing at Dartmouth, but when you look at youth sports, youth football and high school, is there anything the league could be doing beyond the technology stuff to help their current players if they're thinking down the road to their future players?
Sure. We work with representatives at all levels of the game. Primarily, we fund an organization called, not primarily, but significantly, we fund an organization called USA Football, which is in the job of certifying, training, educating coaches, which is, I think over the course of the last few years since they've had their certification program in place, has certified hundreds of thousands of coaches representing millions of kids. So kids are, because usually the youth coach is the one that's the non-professional. It's people like me who get off work with a whistle around your neck and then try to figure out how to run practice. There are no Buddy Tevens. I'm no Buddy Tevens when my 10-year-old plays football, I can assure you. But giving practice plans, teaching them about contact, how to teach tackling, and all those sorts of things are platforms that the league takes on. And we work closely with the high school associations too, increasingly so. The National Federation of High Schools and the state associations. And in fact, they went to a change, they modified, many of the states have modified the amount of tackling they permit in practices. And that was patterned in part after what the NFL and NFLPA did. And it in part was because some of the medical advisors that work with both of these organizations engaged with the medical advisors to those folks. In addition, we've started programs like funding athletic trainers in high schools. There's a dearth of athletic trainers at the high school level, and that's for obvious reasons, the costs involved. There's 2/3 of high schools across the country don't have a full-time athletic trainer. That's a huge problem. And so we've started programs to fund athletic trainers in schools and have added a number of them, but there's so much more to do in those spaces. And that benefits far beyond football. But I do think sports leagues have a responsibility to give back, and I'd like to think that we're doing at least some of the right things in those spaces.
Quickly, because I think we're at time.
So given the accuracy of everything you said with respect to macho-ness and competitiveness and the desire to win, I'm curious for the PA, the league, and the business and legal implications of, as we're looking at how the rules are going to change and the CBA is going to change the next time around, how are you guys going to take into account that players don't want to come out when they're hurt? They don't want to come out when they're concussed because their job and their paycheck and their manhood is on the line, and they're open about it. Now we're seeing more and more players start to retire earlier, listen to the independent neurologists and stuff, but they still want to play. How is that going to be factored in as things go here? Or is that too big of a question?
No. That one was for George, I think.
For everyone.
Oh. I mean, I'm freaking 38 years old, and I still play in a secret pickup game at 6 in the morning, and when I turn my ankle, I want to go play the next day, right? And I'm not getting paid. So I love to play, and NFL players love to play football. That's what they do, beyond the money, beyond the fame. You know, we had our player rep meetings last week. 90% of the conversations had nothing to do with the economics of the CBA. It had everything to do with health and safety, and how do I keep playing this game at this level because I love it so much, okay? So that is just innate to anybody who's played a sport in the room and who's loved it. You love to go out there. The institution's job is to help temper some of that, right? To help protect the players from that instinct when they can't go further, to ensure that that 2, 3, 4 year average career, you know, a little less than 4 year average career, is not going to debilitate them for the rest of their lives at the professional level. So, you know, to get deeper than that, I'm not sure we have time because I've seen the stop sign go up a couple times. But we can go all night about the institutional responsibility to protect the athletes from that instinct. And, you know, I can't believe I'm doing this, Jeff, but I think the league and the union over the last 7, 8 years have done a good job of jointly working together, especially on the concussion protocols, to temper some of that.
What a nice place to end.
See?
Thank you, George, Victoria, Jeff, Ken. Thanks.